Thank you for joining us today for our program, a discussion with Gerber-Hart Librarian and Archivist Erin Bell. I'm Jeannie Long, Executive Director of Chicago Collections Consortium, and I'm pleased to offer today's program in partnership with the Caxton Club. Please note today's discussion will be recorded and available for viewing at a later date on Chicago Collections website and on our YouTube channel as well. I'd like to begin today's program with Chicago Collections Land Acknowledgement Statement, which reads, Chicago Collections Consortium acknowledges and is grateful for the Native peoples who laid the foundation for the city of Chicago and for the diverse Indigenous nations that reside in Chicago today. When you visit our member organizations and when you experience Chicago outdoor spaces, we invite you to join in offering respect and gratitude to the many Indigenous peoples that reside in the Chicagoland region, as well as their ancestors. For those of you who are joining us today for the first time, welcome. And just to let you know, Chicago Collections Consortium is a consortium of over 60 libraries, museums, and cultural organizations, all working together for the preservation and promotion of Chicago history and culture. We share our members' archival holdings through our Explore portal, which provides free and open access to our member collections. We invite you to visit the Explore Chicago Collections website to check out these unique holdings of our members. I'd also like to take this time to thank CCC's donors shown here, whose generous support allows us to offer unique free programming like this one being offered today, as well as supporting our efforts with the Explore Chicago Collections portal. As mentioned, we're quite pleased to be partnering once again with the Caxton Club. A special thank you to Jackie Bosler, president of the Caxton Club. The Caxton Club, as many of you may know, is a Chicago-based membership organization of close to 400 members worldwide who enthusiastically are dedicated to supporting the literary study and promotion of books and associated book arts. Please check out both our websites for more information and a listing of other events and digital resources. I know our time today with Erin is going to go by too quickly, but let's get started. And a reminder to our listeners, we'll save time at the end for Q&A, and please list them. They can be directed to the Q&A on the website. So Erin, let's begin.
All right. Thank you so much, Jeannie. And thank you as well to Jackie Bosler. I'm so pleased to be joined today by the Chicago Collections Consortium and the Caxton Club. This is a great opportunity to talk about Gerber-Hart and what our institution is and does. I'll begin by just talking a little bit about my role. So like I said, we are the Gerber-Hart Library and Archives. If you're unfamiliar with who or what we are the Midwest LGBTQ library and archives, primarily focused on materials in Chicago and Illinois, but we also have an abundance of materials for the rest of the Midwest region. I am currently the operations director at the Gerber-Hart Library and Archives, and it is a part-time capacity. I'm also, outside of that, a medical librarian at an academic setting. So I truly have just a lot of different experiences within the library and archives world. I have been involved with Gerber-Hart for about 5 years. I received the position of operations director in May of 2022, but before that, I was a volunteer. And I got involved volunteering at Gerber-Hart while I was studying to get my master's in library and information science through the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign. A little shout out to my cohort 21.5 for those who are attending and watching. And I'll talk a little bit later about kind of what it's like to volunteer at Gerber-Hart. I guess a spoiler alert is that a lot of what Gerber-Hart does is thanks to the efforts and the time and the passion of a robust volunteer base. There are so many longtime volunteers who it's truly a labor of love. And there's just, if you have the opportunity, if you haven't already visited us in Chicago, if you have the opportunity to visit us in person, you know, if I'm there especially, I'm happy to give you a tour of our archives, but you'll see when you walk into our space why it's something that that draws people in. But first, I'll talk a little bit about our history. Next slide, please. So I just wanted to quickly show this image. This is one of our former volunteers and somebody who came in recently to do some research, found this in a collection. I want to say it was in our Roddy Center papers. And it's a picture of the floor layout of one of our first homes at 3225 North Sheffield. And I circled it in yellow. There's our library in the top corner. And it's a big shared space. All those other rooms are offices belonging to other organizations. This would have been in the early 80s. And there we are, one little room. And we've certainly grown far beyond that today. Next slide, please. So why are we called Gerber-Hart to begin with? So we are named for two very influential and very important figures from Chicago who made just invaluable impacts on the course of LGBTQ activism and history. Henry Gerber, the person that, the first part of our name comes from, he was a gay rights activist in the early 20th century who is responsible for the creation of what was the very first documented, recognized LGBTQ, or then also called homophile, organization in the United States. It was called the Society of Human Rights. It was founded in Illinois in 1924. It could not be overtly about, homosexuality, but the mission and the description of what that organization stood for, there's no mistaking what it's for. And the newsletter that he wrote, that he published, Friendship and Freedom, is openly about gay men in the 1920s. Unfortunately, one of the members of the board at the time of that organization was married to a woman, and when she found out the true nature of the organization, she alerted it to social services, and the police came in, raided his home, and shut that organization down by 1925. Yeah, so it was very short-lived, but because of the importance of that first organization and those newsletters, and kind of just the spark that helped to create a push for LGBTQ representation in organizations. His home in, I want to say it's down in Old Town, if you're familiar with the neighborhoods in Chicago, has a national landmark on it and has achieved national landmark status. He continued to write for other other newsletters, I should say. Gerber really could not hide who he was. In his early 20s, he was actually hospitalized for being a gay man. And one of the ways he could find work was through enlisting in the Army. And it was actually through his work in the Army, going to Germany during World War I, that he was exposed to the German kind of gay subculture and the LGBTQ movements happening there. And he brought that back with him to the United States. Pearl M. Hart is a Chicago lawyer who really just stood for the oppressed. She was considered the guardian angel of the oppressed. She attended John Marshall Law School and was admitted to the bar in 1914. She was the first female lawyer to find work in what was then called the Morals Court, basically working as a public defense lawyer. uh, she literally any group that was oppressed, that is oppressed, that can be oppressed, she stood for them. She was vehemently against the discrimination that was happening against immigrants in particular, because she herself, her family, all immigrated to, yes, immigrated to the United States. And she was the first American born child in her family. She helped found the Chicago chapter of the Mattachine Society, which was a very large LGBTQ rights and I guess kind of a literary focused, scholarly focused organization. But then she found that even kind of too passive. So she and some others founded in 1964 Mattachine Midwest, which was a bit more vocal and politically motivated. And those are both major organizations in the middle 20th century that we do have many of those papers at Gerber-Hart. And I think that is one of our most requested archival collections that researchers like to refer to when they visit us. Pearl herself was a lesbian, and she defended her LGBTQ clients from police harassment, from entrapment, discrimination. She was also very involved in defending those who were convicted of basically allegations of being communists in the mid 20th century. And she, one of her set of clients who were both Chicagoans who had been accused of being communists, she went with them to the Supreme Court and was able to help, with a team of other lawyers as well, was able to help make a case that, oh, because they were being threatened with deportation, they could not, the attorney general could not pursue those allegations against them. It would just be unfair, and they won. So she has an incredible acquittal rate. She was very passionate about those who she defended, and she's, just like Gerber, made an immeasurable mark on LGBTQ gay rights and activism in the 20th century. Next slide, please. So Gerber-Hart began as a dream by Gregory Sprague, amongst other LGBTQ academics in the 1970s. Specifically, Gregory Sprague, who himself was a scholar in gay and lesbian studies, gender studies, he founded what was then called the Chicago Gay and Lesbian History Project. And his dream was for LGBTQ studies to be taken as seriously as other forms of study and scholarly pursuit. He wanted to establish a repository where LGBTQ organizations and activists and scholarly writings and newsletters, all of that, and books, obviously, could all be retained and preserved and made accessible. When a whole section of an area of study isn't taken seriously, there's little motivating people to keep it or to see it as valuable. That even goes for the members of the queer community then too. There was not a place where, prominent lesbian and gay activists could donate their papers. And so how would we be able in future generations to study them if major historical society organizations, it wasn't, top priority for their archival space to be keeping these kinds of collections, or maybe they didn't know about these kinds of collections, or perhaps the people involved in those organizations didn't want those major repositories to have access to their papers, which might out them, which might out the people attending their events, other members. and could potentially open them up to harassment. So we needed to have a place where we could ourselves protect and preserve all of our materials. They held a one-day drive. Oh, sorry, go back one more moment. I just wanted to touch on a couple more sentences. They held a one-day drive in April 1980 to gather materials from the community. This still holds true to today. A lot of our materials at Gerber-Hart are all brought in from the community. It was originally called the Midwest Gay and Lesbian Archive and Library, but very shortly thereafter, they realized that we needed to pay homage to two great figures in LGBTQ activism history. And so Henry Gerber and Pearl M. Hart were chosen for that. Okay, next slide, please. So in my review of Gerber-Hart's history and our past programs and all of that, I found some wonderful write-ups that previous directors and staff put together that talk about all of our firsts. I'm not going to list every single one, but I have a couple favorites on this list. I think my absolute favorite, of course, is in March 6th of 1994 is when we had our first fax machine installed. We have always been very reliant on the funds, on community-raised funds and fundraisers to support our mission and all of our activities. So fundraising and grants have been with us from the very beginning. We also, as a library, we wanted to promote circulation. And so fiction book discussion clubs, the Lesbian Fiction Book Discussion Club was founded, I think almost a full decade before the Gay Fiction Book Discussion Club was started. And we've had many people who served as librarians, someone who was later appointed the first male librarian, which is interesting because I believe Erwin Fay was also a male. We also in 1992 had our first yearly book sale, which I'll talk about later, as that's one of our most important events and one of our most, it's important to me as operations director, I should clarify. It's one of our most widely received and maybe attended events, because that's where we open up all the books that we can't fit into our collection. And we also take many materials that aren't LGBTQ in nature with the explicit intention that they will then go into our book sale. And people know this, and they know that we have boxes and boxes and boxes. Last book sale in October, we had 100 boxes of books, and they know that they can come and get books for $1 or $2. Next slide, please. Also in my review of our history, just seeing all of the amazing events and activities we were able to do in the 90s, which did start to put Gerber-Hart on the map. Even within the LGBTQ community in Chicago, we were not terrifically widely known. I think that is unfortunately something that still somewhat carries on today, and I'll talk about that a little later. But we, not for trying, we certainly put on many events that I think gave us much more recognition in the 90s. Our first annual fall fundraiser, which was the 10th anniversary celebration, involved Alison Bechtel and Essex Hemphill. We, in the 90s, started to have some major Chicago publications writing about us. I know Windy City Times has long been kind of a friend of the Gerber-Hart Library and Archives, and we've had some publications, some articles in there as well. In 1993 is when ALA first featured an article all about us in their American Libraries publication. And that was our first national press. And then it's, I think, very special that one of our board presidents was on the actual national coordinating committee for the first observance of LGBTQ History Month, which was in October 1994 and is every October since then. Next slide, please. It's I made quite a jump here. I don't include a slide talking about the 2000s or the 2010s. We we continued to have many events. If anyone has questions about particular ones, I have a big reference sheet right up here next to me because I'm not as great with dates, but um, I think that was something we realized as a big way that we can get our name out there is collaborative events. And I mentioned that on the previous slide, but an organization we collaborated a lot with in the 90s and going on from there is what was then called the Chicago Historical Society and is now the Chicago History Museum. We actually had one of our benefits there, and our guests of honor were Mayor Richard Daley and Chaz Bono. So yeah, so we have had, you know, pretty big name individuals involved in our events at Gerber-Hart. And we still do get some amazing, amazing collaborations. But it's, sometimes it just still doesn't seem like enough. And I guess that's just, we just got to keep getting our name out there. And one of the ways I think we've been able to do that recently is with the podcast that I was one of the people involved in founding and working on that. And also working on that with me was Jen Dentel, our social media and programming coordinator, and Ari Mejia, an incredible audio producer who's worked on countless podcasts and audio features. I can talk about that a little bit more later, though. Now I want to talk about our archives. Next slide, please. So a few statistics about our archives. We have over 170 collections and growing. As operations director, I am constantly receiving emails every week from individuals who want to donate materials to our archives. We have also a huge ephemera collection, which contains hundreds and hundreds of individual pieces of small flyers, of pamphlets, maybe some loose papers that could be integrated into one of our collections, but just have not yet been processed to that level, and several pieces of paper that would not fit in any of our existing larger collections, and so are in a file all by themselves. But those have all, no, they have not all been cataloged, but they are getting to the point where they too are cataloged. So there's just such a wide array of materials people can look at when they come to visit. All of our archives have been, to my knowledge, all of our archives have been donated. We have no archives acquisition budget at this time. Our archives are split between two temperature controlled archives. We call them G stacks and H stacks. G stacks, I'll talk about them in a little bit individually, but basically G stacks is where we keep our individual and organizational collections, and H stacks is where we keep our special collections. That's newsletters, newspapers, periodicals, and our erotica collection. Between these two, well, particularly in G stacks, we have hundreds of linear feet in just that one room. One collection alone is over 288 linear feet, which if you're not an archivist, think of a linear foot as like a banker's box. So that's about 288 baker's boxes effectively. And that's all just our Bill Kelly collection. Our archives are open to the public. It doesn't mean that people can just walk right in, but anyone can come into Gerber-Hart and say, hey, I saw that you have the Bill Kelly collection. I was interested in looking at some boxes that were identified on the finding aid. Would you be able to pull those for me? And I really can't think of a situation where we would say no, unless the materials they wanted to look at happened to be restricted. It just might take a little time. So we prefer somewhat advanced notice. And I'll talk about that, I think, very shortly on a future slide. One of the ways we are trying to spread more awareness and increase accessibility to our collections is through Archive Space and Preservica. For those who work in the library and archives world, Archive Space, is that's a platform where you can create records that allow researchers to search through the archival collections you have to see lists of the boxes and those contents of the boxes inside each collection. Um, we're so blessed to have had an incredible archivist who was able to add the bulk of our archival collections onto archive space. And we do have that connected to our main website. So if you're ever interested, you can search there by, individual name, organizational name, you can search by keywords. And that's one great way to explore our collection. We do have a Preservica account as well. It has not been added to our website yet, but we are working on expanding that to just make things more visual. And that's something I think I'm very passionate about with our website. And you'll see I tried to just inject as much visual material into this presentation as possible. Next slide, please. So H-Stacks, yes, I did have to cover up one of the VHS tapes there. H-Stacks is, like I said, where we keep our newspapers, newsletters, periodicals, magazines, travel guides, and our erotica collection. It's also where we keep some oversized posters and framed objects. Yes, we do collect erotica. A big part of LGBTQ history is, the stuff that we couldn't talk about in polite society, and that was considered very taboo and dirty and just bad. And we are so happy to have as many VHS tapes as we can. I mean, that picture on the left does not show all of the VHS tapes that we have. Now they are in our special collections. We don't show them. They are not available for circulation or anything like that. But we do maintain a database of all of the titles that we have. We also have several erotica magazines, and one of my favorites is our pre-Stonewall erotica serials. So these are going to be, think like muscle magazines or just any kind of material that could be loosely considered erotic, maybe could somehow get by could get by standards in anytime pre-1969, but was absolutely geared towards the LGBTQ community and creating a way to disseminate erotic materials without it getting flagged. You'll also notice in that picture there's a giant tongue on the wall. So that is also one of our favorite things to point out and to share with visitors to our archives. That is an enormous cloth mouth and tongue that used to hang in Carol's Speakeasy, which was a drag bar in the 70s. We have that mouth, and I think we have a sign, and I think we have a shirt. We probably have some other materials that I can't quite summon to mind right now, but we have used that tongue. It is incredibly heavy, so we try not to move it too much, but we have brought it out for some special events. And it is incredibly Instagrammable, and definitely something that every single person takes a selfie with when they come through our archives. Next slide, please. I just included a small smattering of some of our periodicals and magazines here. There are so many. We do maintain pretty robust holdings of a lot of the major titles. Again, our scope is focused on the Midwest and Chicago, but we do occasionally go outside of that scope for things that have just greater significance to the wider LGBTQ community and might be something that researchers may want to reference when they visit us. That's why we do have international mail. We might have some newspapers that are outside of the Midwest territory, like The Advocate. We will, we will maintain some of those, although as you can probably see from just that picture of our H-Stacks alone, space is kind of at a premium. So, as with any archives, there's always a discussion about what to keep and what can we give to another organization. And I think that we want to make sure that we have space in both of our archives to continue to grow and take in the collections that we want, and to make sure that we can cover gaps. Next slide, please. So our archival collections are in G-Stacks. Again, these are the individual and organizational collections. So that is me in the left picture. And then we've got a couple of Jen Dentel, our social media programming coordinator, and Whit Sadisky, an archivist, sitting in G-Stacks. And again, it is an enormous temperature controlled room that is absolutely just stuffed full of 42 years of collected queer history in Chicago and the Midwest. I am standing in an aisle kind of in the middle, but there's at least two more full aisles on either side of those shelves. And there's a couple shelves in the back, which you can see Jen and Whit are sitting in front of. It's a lot of these materials do have a finding aid, but I would say a lot of them also need to be completely processed. There's still so much that I don't know that is in our collection. There's still so much that every time I walk inside G-Stacks and H-Stacks and I happen to turn my head in a new direction, I learn something new about our archives and our holdings. Volunteers are incredibly helpful in helping us to process and preserve and to describe the collections that we have. Gerber-Hart, I say this on a slide towards the end, Gerber-Hart is actually only open to the public about 18 hours a week. And during that time, and we only have 3 staff members, myself included. We don't currently have a paid archivist position, so there's quite a backlog, and we pretty much need to have volunteers do what they can to help us make sure that we can get things, at least described and somewhat processed and shelved in one of these temperature controlled rooms until we have the ability to have an archivist actually go through and do a professional job of organizing and describing. Next slide, please. So if you do want to do some archival research, like I said, we are open. There's no fee. You don't need to have a membership. There's no really need for an appointment. We just prefer some advance notice, but if you forgot to email, which you would mainly be emailing me, if you forgot to email me and you just showed up and said, hey, I'm sorry I forgot to email, but I would really love to look at your Lorraine Chade Baskerville collection. Just give me 10 minutes. I'll go grab it from the back and pull it right out. We have people look through the collections just right there in the middle of our library reading room. We have 3 tables. If someone did want to look at more sensitive materials, we do let people with some restrictions. Obviously, you need to be 18 years of age and older. Look at our erotica materials. We would probably just put someone in a more contained private room away from the main reading room. We do provide gloves. We will give a quick tutorial on if many people have come to Gerber-Hart excited to look at our archives and have never visited an archives before. And so we want to make sure that they know how to safely handle the materials, not have any beverages on the table. And people can take notes in pencil and they can take pictures. We have so many materials, and we have it's been so cool to see the different ways that our materials have been used. Next slide, please. So I mentioned earlier that we have a podcast that we just put out. I think it was a little under a year ago from today. It was back in February of 2022 is when we first started releasing our episodes. And podcasts, I love listening to them myself, and they are really a great way of reaching a broader audience if you've never considered it, or if you're not familiar with what podcasts are. it's like an 8-episode radio show that we put together, hours of interviews, collecting audio, kind of B-roll and some audio files and tracks to incorporate music tracks. We have volunteer voices in the podcast, and we were able to tell the story of, I think, 7 awesome collections that we have. One episode is just about Gerber-Hart's history too. So obviously that's drawing from the Gerber-Hart collection and interviews with people who were involved in Gerber-Hart's history. I'll just run through these names of the collections. I don't think I'll have time to go through all of them, but the topmost far left image is the cover of our podcast, Unboxing Queer History. To that right is a picture of Bill Kelly. To the right of that is Carrie Barnett, who was one of the owners and operators of the People Like Us bookstore. To the right of that, in the top right corner, is some materials from our Amigas Latinas collection. Below that is some cards behind the mug, which are talking about one of our past exhibits, which is Activism in the Margins of Identity. To the left of that is a person sitting in a boat holding a fish from the Gals collection, which is the Great Angling Lesbian Society. It was a fishing group for lesbians and women, and yeah, it's one of our fan favorites amongst volunteers. To the left of that is one of hundreds, thousands, so many pictures that I have not been able to look at all of them, of a wonderful Chicago drag queen from the mid 20th century. We have photographs, I think, stemming back to the late 1940s of her. Her name is Miss Tilly. And our social media programming coordinator, Jen Dentel, has been doing an amazing job of sharing her images on Instagram every Tuesday for Tilly Tuesdays. And then last but certainly not least, at the far bottom left corner is Lorraine Shade Baskerville herself, who was the Black trans woman in Chicago to found the first trans-led, trans-serving social services organization in Chicago, Transgenesis, in 1995. Next slide, please. Now I'm going to talk about our library, and I included some pictures of all of our pins. There's just way too many. I couldn't pick one, so I included a lot. Next slide, please. So we do have a circulating library. This is a slightly blurry picture that is somewhat updated. So I want to say sometime early last year. But yes, our entire collection is completely donated. We've been blessed to have some individuals asking us for wish lists. One man in particular from California, Dennis Hall, who has been buying brand new books in like YA books and fiction and nonfiction titles, and also helping us to cover some gaps in our collection as far as making sure we have materials that address underrepresented communities within the LGBTQ community. And it's wonderful. You just have to be, I think, age 13 and up to have an account with us to borrow books. I have recently set the limit to 10 items per person. That includes DVDs and VHS tapes if you have a VHS player, audiobooks. Yeah, we have some patrons who come every single week and borrow materials. Next slide, please. I want to make sure I can get to everything in my time. I mentioned a few of these stats already, but we do have almost 26,000 items in our catalog, circulating and non-circulating. We don't have library cards yet, although we have been floating the idea of creating just a fun novelty card. So more on that to come. Volunteers do help. We don't have a paid librarian on staff. Again, I kind of am currently handling a lot of responsibilities when it comes to maintaining the library, but volunteers are essential with shelving, locating items for patrons, and even processing book donations when they come in. I just have a few pictures here. The one on the far right is of a current display in our library all about queer comics. It's very popular. Next slide, please. I've also been wanting to make sure that we have rotating book displays every month. Every time there's some some date of recognition. I want to make sure that we have materials out to just continue to draw people's attention to books in our collection, especially things that may not have circulated yet. I want to make sure that they get attention. Next slide, please. Exhibits and events. So yes, one of the ways that I think Gerber-Hart has been really excelling at in the last few years is all the events that we've been putting on, all of the exhibits, the incredible exhibits that we've been putting on. I have a picture on the far right there of one of our former volunteers helping to set up a book sale, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. But we have many exhibits that have been just completely curated and created by volunteers in their spare time outside of their day jobs. It's incredible to see the work that they've done and the caliber of quality research and emotional depth that has come out in every single one of these exhibits. And when we get to have the debut, the exhibit debut event, that's usually a really fun event to volunteer for. Next slide, please. So our current exhibit is Decoded: Surviving the Law as a Sexual Deviant. This is, I just included a little write-up straight from our website. It is a very important, a challenging, and sometimes difficult collection as it does navigate kind of the way that homosexuality was criminalized and treated, and the interaction between homosexuality and the legal code in the 50s, 60s, just pretty much the entire 20th century, but with a particular focus on the mid 20th century. There is a peep show corner where viewers, if they so choose, can see footage from a documentary that was collected without the person's consent or knowledge of men entering public restroom. It was captured by the police. And then in the one of the corners of the exhibit also is a really cool feature exploring the hanky code, a way that queer men could communicate to one another their sexual interests and their needs without alerting the straight public. Next slide, please. Just some really great graphics from our past exhibits. A lot of the focus of past exhibits has been on activism. And we also had the Lavender Women and Killer Dykes exhibit, which focused pretty much on lesbians and queer women writers and queer women activists. We just updated our website to make all of the write-ups and details about these exhibits easier to find. So I highly encourage you to go to gerberhart.org and look at our exhibits page to see more information about these really great past exhibits. Q, Activism at the Margins of Identity, had a really awesome feature where they built from scratch a kind of replica like urinal with all of the writing you would see on the walls and stickers, and it was just such a cool space and a really unique way of giving patrons and visitors to the exhibit a way of interacting. Next slide, please. I mentioned our book sale that happens twice a year now because we've been receiving so many awesome donations of books that can go towards it. We also have a spring benefit and a fall fundraiser gala. The top picture in here is from our last gala in October of 2022. We had some amazing lighting there, and the focus of that one was all about the podcast that we worked on. In particular, we did a live replaying of the episode all about the People Like Us collection. That was really special. Our programming just has been off the charts, largely due to the efforts of Jen Dentel, social media programming coordinator, and some of the ways that Gerber-Hart has always tried to collaborate with the community. There we go. Has been through author book readings and Q&As. We've definitely returned back to that in full force this past year. We've also been trying to do more educational presentations and collaborative events. One such is the Read Run. Chicago had a special event called The Girls in 3B by Valerie Taylor. Well, it's a book, but what they did was one of our volunteers is also involved in Read Run Chicago, and they put together a unique run where people could go on this run through Chicago and kind of at different areas would stop at places mentioned in the book. So it was a paired like book discussion and a run. And then after the run, they met and they Jen, who's sort of our resident Valerie Taylor expert, led everybody in a book discussion about that particular title. And it was a really popular, really great event. And we're hopeful to have more like that. Very creative tying of, activity and books. Next slide, please. I mentioned just that we've, one of the things we do most is, author book reading, book discussions, readings, and Q&As. And we do have a couple coming up. One actually is this weekend with John D'Amelio. It's Memories of a Gay Catholic Boyhood. And then we also have another event with the author of a biography on George Platt Lines. You can scan that QR code, or you can go to our website to see more information about our other upcoming events, including, next slide, please, our book sale. So doing the book sales is something that has been kind of my responsibility, and but I don't say that with any, discomfort or dread. I actually really enjoy putting together the book sales and seeing the pieces kind of all come together. And last year we had our book sale in a very jam-packed October, which we will probably not be doing that again. But since October is LGBTQ History Month, we felt it was a great time to have an LGBTQ book sale and also make it lightly Halloween themed. So this time we're having one in February, and we decided to make it Valentine's romance themed. We are going to have a lot of really fun activities there, in addition to just the main event, which is a book sale. You can find all sorts of straight and LGBTQ goodies there, including a sizable erotica collection, all available for purchase. And it's always just a fun event, and a great way to meet other people, which, in this context has kind of an added romantic nature. So we are going to be doing some kind of DIY personal ads in our library with our community boards. So stay tuned. I hope you can come. Next slide, please. I mentioned earlier that volunteers make up so much of the efforts of Gerber-Hart, and I realize I'm almost out of time. I realize I'm actually over time. So I'll just say volunteering at Gerber-Hart is really fun. I in particular am very passionate about making sure that every volunteer is able to work on a project that is meaningful to them, and I do my best to support them. And I also want to make sure that it's not something that anybody stresses about if they aren't able to make it every single week. So if you're interested, please email me at info@gerberhart.org, or we do have a button on our website now, which was just updated, where you can just fill out an application to be a volunteer right then and there. Next slide, please. So just lastly, if you want to come visit us, we are on the north side of Chicago, the far north side. We are up in Rogers Park at 6500 North Clark Street on the second floor above a Howard Brown location. We are open, like I said, just a few hours a week, but it's Wednesday and Thursday evenings from 6 p.m. to 9 p.m., Fridays from 12 p.m. to 4 p.m., and Saturdays from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. You can call us, you can email the info@gerberhart.org email, which I am pretty much the one checking, or you can stop in and ask away, whatever you need. There's so much more that I could have talked about today, and I definitely had to go skip over things that I am not, didn't have time to talk about. But if there's any questions, I would be more than happy to do my best to answer them.
Erin, thanks so much. And this is just in a short amount of time, what Gerber-Hart Library and Archives has been able to accomplish, so kudos to not only your board, your colleagues, but your core of volunteers too. I mean, it's amazing. We do have, and I wish we had 2 more hours, but we do have some robust questions coming in too. Let's begin. So one of the questions you had answered, can researchers watch your VHS tapes on site?
We do have a VHS player connected to a CRT TV on a cart. And there is a way for, if researchers are interested in viewing any of our VHS materials that are in our archives, we can set you up with that probably in one of our back rooms, just so it's not too disruptive to the main reading room. But obviously some VHS materials, just due to condition issues, may not be able to be viewed.
Another question came in. It sounds like you have a nice diverse collection of LGBTQ and plus materials. When looking for donations, how do you ensure variety and representation and fill in the gaps? That was another amazing, not having, to actively purchase archives. I mean, this is a great question. How do you ensure that variety and how do you fill in those gaps?
And yeah, thank you for asking that, because that is something we are constantly talking about. I am very passionate about making sure that, the majority of our collection is currently focused on cis, white, male, LGBTQ figures. And I want to make sure that the collections that we have that are not just about that are amplified. And I want to make sure that we can prove to our community that we are a good location and a good repository to safeguard those kinds of materials. And I think by doing that, we in our collections committee, in our engagement and expressions committee, we're discussing ways that we can, I think, connect to communities outside of the north side of Chicago, that we can connect to communities outside of Chicago, period. And I think one of the ways we're hoping to do that is through just collaborating on events and helping support other organizations in their events. And I think eventually we do need to have an archives acquisition fund. So we're also trying to, just, I think, grow in terms of our fundraising abilities. And so that's going to be one of our areas of focus.
Another question, Erin, you had mentioned the fiction book clubs and discussion groups. Are they in person? And if not, can someone from the outside of Chicago attend virtually?
So we don't currently have any active book discussion clubs right now. I think we just don't have the staff or the volunteer capacity to be able to sustain that. Right now, the closest one can get to book discussions is through our author events. I would encourage you to check our website, where we have just, again, thanks to a wonderful event on Monday, Martin Luther King Jr. Day, Day of Service, an outside organization helped us spice up our website and added a calendar where you can see events 2-3 months in advance and read the book and attend that.
How many physical locations has Gerber-Hart Library and Archives had in their history? I know you had touched about that in the beginning.
Yeah. So it's funny. I have a reference sheet next to me, but just I've been curious about this myself, and I've counted the number of times we have moved 7 times since we first opened our doors in January of 1981. We've been at our current location at 6500 North Clark Street for about 10 years now. Before that, we were at Granville. We started largely in the neighborhood that is now Lakeview, North Halsted, Wrigleyville, and we just kind of slowly moved our way up as I think to the queer community has slowly moved up and increased the number of gay bars and LGBTQ services on the north side as well.
And are there any remote volunteer opportunities?
We are trying to figure out, we want there to be more. There are a couple things right now, but I think the board has been talking about ways that we can make use of people who, have skill sets that they want to donate to us as part of their volunteer work, and things that can be done remotely through that. I know that one thing we definitely are always in search for is people with web development skills, or that kind of thing, because I am not a web developer.
So stay tuned for opportunities there. We're excited at Chicago Collections to see more of and to be able to share the library and archives at Gerber-Hart, especially the special collections, Chicago focused, through our Explore portal. So those materials will be in conversation with each other. What are some of the things that our listeners today can be look forward to seeing on Explore in the days ahead?
It would be, so we would be going through our archive space collections, and we would be importing those, I think largely in kind of in the order of what would be most desirable. I think any collection that was tied to our podcast has been very much sought after, that particularly our Amigas Latinas collections and the Lorraine Shade Baskerville collections. Those have been asked for tremendously more since our podcast came out. So I would want to make sure those are among the first that are those materials are recorded and shared via Explore.
And maintaining and preserving the huge collection of VHS tapes that you have. What's the thought in terms of digitizing those?
Well, that's something that we've also been talking about, because we don't own the rights to any of those VHS tapes. Those are all, they were put out by, like the erotica VHS tapes, they were put out by distribution companies. There are individuals who still possess the copyright to those, and they may actually exist in a digitized format elsewhere.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that I am very passionate in my archives work, and I'm very passionate about things being used. I want to make sure that if we're going to hold on to something for 40 years, that we are going to make sure that it's accessible, people are aware of it, and that it can be used. And so my goal is that eventually we will be able to have a designated space that is 18 plus, where we can display and curate an exhibit centered around our erotica materials, and hopefully tie in our many VHS tapes into that as well.
Another question that came in regard to donations. How often do you turn away donations, and is it typically for the reason of duplication?
I would say yes, particularly when it's someone asking about, whether we have a particular set of journals. For example, I mentioned international mail earlier, or sometimes people ask if we need copies of the Chicago Gay Crusader, or we even maintain copies of Windy City Times. And Windy City Times does exist largely in a digital format on their own website, but we do maintain physical copies of that entire collection. So we have no need for that anymore. I think we probably do turn away collections like that. If I had to put a number on it, it would be once a month to once like a quarter. More likely than not, people want to donate books, which would either go towards our circulating collection, or we tell them up front that, if we can't put this into our collection itself, if it's an LGBTQ material, we can't put it into our collection, it will go towards our book sale, which will help to fund other, ventures in our operation. And most people are pretty happy to hear about that. But we also offer, if we can't take this after all, we can help to find another home for it at another institution or another repository.
Great. Well, our time is coming to a close. Erin, thank you. Thanks for making the time for this discussion today. Hopefully, it will spark an interest for visitors to Gerber-Hart Library and Archives. We'll look forward to future partnerships with you, with the Caxton Club, and really appreciate everybody joining us today. We'll look forward to sharing a recording once this has been edited with our listeners today, and we'll be in touch. So thank you.
Thank you so much.